New York, 1995. A raw, independent film called Kid Shocks the World, exposing a generation of lost adolescents. But for its young amateur cast, it wasn't art, it was a curse. Justin Pierce, the main star, ended his own life. Harold Hunter died of an overdose. The film that launched them became a grinding machine, devouring the very children it brought into the light, turning Generation X icons into forgotten tragedies. But while they were consumed, one 15-year-old girl, discovered by chance on a city stoop, survived. She didn't just survive, she ascended. She used that cursed film as a stepping stone, not a gravestone, and built a career spanning 3 decades, moving from the stages of Rent to the gritty world of Sin City and becoming the legendary Ahsoka Tano. She is Rosario Dawson, the lone witness. How can one person be a symbol of Hollywood's dazzling success, while simultaneously serving as the living memorial for the tragedy that destroyed all her friends? Her story begins in the Lower East Side, New York, during the 1980s. This was not the gentrified chic neighborhood of today, with its boutique hotels, artisanal coffee shops, and multi-million-dollar condominiums. This was a different world entirely. This was a war zone, a frontier, a crucible where the city's forgotten and marginalized were forged into something new, something resilient. It was a landscape of immense grinding poverty, a place where the American dream had come to die and be resurrected as something stranger, harder, and more communal. It was the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic, a place where grief was a constant companion, hanging in the air like the scent of burnt-out buildings. And yet, it was also a place of explosive creativity, a melting pot where artists, poets, musicians, immigrants, and revolutionaries bled their souls onto the canvas of the city streets. Into this cauldron, on May 9th, 1979, Rosario Isabel Dawson was born. Her very existence is a testament to the complex tapestry of the world she entered. Her mother, Isabel Celeste, was a singer and writer of Afro-Cuban and Puerto Rican descent, a woman of immense talent and even greater fortitude. She was only 17 years old when Rosario was born, a teenager navigating the treacherous waters of motherhood in a city that offered little in the way of a safety net. Rosario's biological father, Patrick Harris, a construction worker of Native American and Irish-Scottish ancestry, was not a presence in her life. The man she would come to know and love as her father, the man who would raise her as his own, was Greg Dawson. A fellow construction worker, Greg met Isabel when Rosario was just a year old, falling in love not only with the vibrant young woman, but with her infant daughter as well. He adopted Rosario, giving her his name and, more importantly, a model of steadfast, devoted fatherhood. Her origins are a beautiful mosaic: Afro-Cuban, Puerto Rican, Native American, and Irish/Scottish. This rich blend would later become a quiet superpower in Hollywood, allowing her to defy the industry's obsession with typecasting. She wasn't just one thing, so she could be anything. She could inhabit a multitude of worlds because a multitude of worlds already inhabited her. But this advantage would only become clear much later. First, there was the matter of survival. The defining chapter of her childhood, the experience that would become the core operating system of her entire life, began when she was around 6 years old. The Dawsons, like so many families in their neighborhood, found themselves priced out of existence. The rent, an ever-increasing demand from an indifferent market, became an insurmountable wall. They faced the terrifying prospect of homelessness, but in the resourceful, defiant spirit of the Lower East Side, they chose a different path. They became squatters. The family moved into a derelict, abandoned tenement building at 544 East 13th Street. This was not a charmingly rustic fixer-upper. It was a shell, a carcass of a building left to rot by its owners and the city. There was no electricity save for what could be dangerously siphoned from a nearby lamppost. There was no running water, no plumbing, no central heating to ward off the brutal New York winters. The walls were crumbling, the windows were shattered, and the entire structure groaned under the weight of neglect. This was not a temporary solution. This was their home for the better part of a decade. For a 6-year-old girl, this could have been a narrative of pure despair, a story of lack and deprivation. But through the extraordinary alchemy of her parents' love and ingenuity, it became something else entirely. It became a story of creation. Greg and Isabel, a construction worker and a woman trained as a plumber and electrician, were not revolutionaries by ideology, but by necessity. Rosario didn't just live in squalor. She watched day by day as her parents literally brought their home to life. She saw her father and mother pulling wires through decaying walls, laying pipes to bring in cold water, patching holes, and slowly, miraculously, carving a habitable space out of the ruins. They were not just tenants, they were architects. They were not just residents, they were pioneers. This was the lesson imprinted on the developing mind of a child. Before she learned long division, before she read classic literature, Rosario Dawson learned the most fundamental principle of physics and metaphysics. You can create something from nothing. She learned that systems, the electrical grid, the water mains, the housing market, can and do fail. But she also learned that human will, community, and practical skills are a more reliable currency. This experience forged in her a profound resilience, a complete and utter lack of preciousness. Decades later, the manufactured crises of a multi-million-dollar film set, with its demanding stars and logistical nightmares, would seem like child's play. She had lived without a working toilet. A delayed shooting schedule would never intimidate her. The squat was more than just their apartment. It was a vertical village, a micro-society built on the principles of mutual aid. The concept of a neighbor was transformed. These were not just people you passed in the hallway. They were co-conspirators in the shared project of survival. One family might have a knack for patching roofs. Another might have a connection for firewood. The Dawsons, with their invaluable trade skills, became a vital hub in this ecosystem. After bringing power and water to their own unit, they helped their neighbors do the same. This was not charity. It was solidarity. It was the understanding that your survival was intrinsically linked to the survival of the person next door. This environment also gave her a PhD in empathy. The struggles of the world were not abstract headlines in a newspaper. They were the lived realities of the people around her. She grew up alongside family members and neighbors who were battling the twin demons of poverty and the HIV/AIDS virus. The plague was not a distant threat. It was in her building, at her dinner table. She saw firsthand the courage, the fear, and the profound injustice of it all. This proximity to suffering did not harden her. It softened her. It instilled in her a deep, abiding sense of responsibility for those who are left behind, for those the system has discarded. The musical Rent, which would later become a defining moment in her career, is often cited as a romanticized depiction of this bohemian lifestyle. For Rosario, it wasn't a musical. It was a documentary of her life. The characters of Mark, Roger, and Mimi weren't fictional archetypes. They were composites of the people she knew, the people she loved. Amidst this challenging environment, her mother, Isabel, was a fierce and unwavering advocate for her children's future. She understood that while the squat was a necessary means of survival, It would not be their final destination. Education was the escape route, the non-negotiable priority. Isabel was determined that her children would not be defined or limited by their circumstances. Rosario was a bright and diligent student, a testament to her mother's focus and her own innate intelligence. She attended an alternative school in Manhattan and eventually graduated with honors, a quiet triumph against a backdrop of systemic disadvantage. Her intellectual curiosity was vast and varied, even as she began to explore acting. Studying at the prestigious Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute, another part of her was drawn to more tangible structural pursuits. This is a fascinating and revealing detail in her life story. In 2002, at a time when her acting career was beginning to ascend, she enrolled in a civil engineering class at Columbia University. She even considered applying for full admission to the Ivy League institution. Consider the poetry of that choice. The girl who watched her father build a home from the ground up was drawn to the formal study of how to build things that last, how to design systems that work. It was a flirtation with an alternate life, a what if that speaks volumes about her core identity. She was and is a builder at heart, but she was also a pragmatist. The lessons of the squat had taught her that you must work with the materials you have in the moment you are in. She worried, with good reason, that taking 4 years off to pursue a degree would mean sacrificing the precarious foothold she had gained in Hollywood. The entertainment industry is notoriously fickle, a world of short memories and shifting allegiances. She knew that other talented young women like Michelle Rodriguez were rising with a similar background and intensity. She had an opportunity and she knew she had to seize it. She couldn't afford to stop building. The foundation had been laid in the harshest of conditions, and now it was time to construct the first floor. This foundation, built from literal rubble, community-driven survival, and a pragmatic understanding of a world where systems fail, forged a young woman who was resilient, resourceful, and utterly unimpressed by artifice. She had chosen the precarious path of acting over the stable blueprint of a university education, a decision rooted in the squat dweller's creed. You must build with the materials you have now. She didn't have to wait long. The world she had chosen, the world of art and performance, did not ask her to audition. It simply and fatefully arrived on her doorstep. Rosario Dawson's entry into the world of acting is not a story of meticulous planning, relentless auditions, or a family legacy. It is the kind of story that feels like pure, unadulterated Hollywood fiction, the urban equivalent of the girl next door discovered at a soda fountain myth. It was a collision of fate, time, and place. She was 15 years old, a girl forged in the crucible of the 1980s Lower East Side, just sitting on the stoop, the front steps of her family's building. She was not trying to be seen. She was simply living, breathing the air of the neighborhood that had raised her. And then 2 men walked by. These were not just any men. They were the photographer and director Larry Clark, and a very young, unknown writer with a preternatural, haunting voice named Harmony Korine. Clark was already a figure of immense controversy, a visual chronicler of America's disaffected youth, capturing skaters, drug users, and fringe communities with a lens that was both intimate and unsettling. Korine was his protege, a prodigy who had written a screenplay that pulsed with the raw, chaotic, and dangerous energy of their time. They were in the process of casting this film, a project that would soon detonate in the center of American culture. They were not looking for trained actors or polished headshots. They were looking for authenticity. When they saw Rosario, they saw it. They were immediately struck not by a manufactured glamour, but by the undeniable realness of her. She was the face of the New York they were trying to document. She had a presence, a self-possession that belied her years, an awareness in her eyes that spoke of a life already lived. They approached her, and just like that, with the casual world-altering suddenness of a lightning strike, she was cast in the 1995 film Kids. This was not a gentle introduction to cinema. Kids was not a teen comedy or a high school drama. It was a raw, unflinching, and terrifyingly intimate documentary-style look at a group of aimless teenagers in New York City over the course of a single sweltering 24-hour period. The film's narrative, loose and observational, followed these teenagers as they navigated a world of casual sex, rampant drug use, and the looming, omnipresent specter of the AIDS crisis. The dialogue was largely improvised. The performances were from actual teenagers, many of them non-actors, and the camera's gaze was relentless, refusing to look away from the most disturbing and tragic moments. Rosario was cast as Ruby, a character who becomes a central, heartbreaking figure in the ensemble. She is a young, sexually active girl who, along with her friend, finds herself in a doctor's office, confronting the horrifying possibility that she has been exposed to HIV by a boy named Telly, the film's nihilistic, predatory protagonist. Ruby's journey and her final devastating test result provides the film with its moral and emotional anchor, a stark punctuation mark on the story's grim trajectory. When Kids was released, it was not merely a film, it was a cultural explosion. It was slapped with a rare commercially toxic NC-17 rating by the MPAA for its graphic content, a decision the distributors, Miramax, fought by releasing it unrated. Critics were violently divided. Some, like Roger Ebert, condemned it as exploitative, pornographic, and morally bankrupt. Others hailed it as a masterpiece of brutal realism, a vital, necessary wake-up call to a society that preferred to ignore its own children. It was and remains one of the most controversial films of its era. And in the very center of this firestorm was a 15-year-old girl from a squat who had never acted in a feature film before. It was, in every sense of the phrase, a trial by fire. Many young people would have been consumed by the controversy, the intensity of the material, and the sudden, harsh glare of the public eye. But Rosario was not like other young people. She had been raised in the very environment the film depicted. The rawness did not shock her. The despair did not intimidate her. She understood these characters, not as abstract subjects, but as versions of the people she saw every day. Her performance was astonishing. In a film deliberately filled with the awkward, untrained energy of non-actors, she had an undeniable magnetic presence. She was natural, convincing, and utterly heartbreaking. She wasn't just in the film. She anchored its emotional core, providing a necessary counterpoint of vulnerability and dawning horror. Despite the moral panic surrounding the movie, or perhaps because of it, Rosario received praise for her work. She had survived the cinematic equivalent of being thrown into a volcano, and she had emerged on the other side not just intact, but as a name to watch. She had proven from her very first moment on screen that she was fearless. Following the shockwave of Kids, she began the difficult work of building a career. The path from a controversial art house lightning rod to a sustainable life as an actor is notoriously difficult. She began to build her resume, navigating the challenging world of independent film. She appeared in Girls' Night Out in 1997, but her next significant collaboration, the one that signaled she was more than a one-hit wonder, came from another New York icon, Spike Lee. In 1998, Lee cast her in He Got Game. This was a major step up, a validation from one of the industry's most important and revered directors. She played Lala Vanilla, the girlfriend of Jesus Shuttlesworth, the basketball prodigy played by Ray Allen, and the estranged son of Denzel Washington's character. It was a step into a more structured, narrative-driven world, and she proved she could share the screen with cinematic royalty like Washington. She continued to work steadily in smaller films like Side Streets and Light It Up, demonstrating a blue-collar work ethic that traced right back to her parents. She was not waiting for stardom. She was laying the bricks of a profession. Then in 2001, she showed her versatility and, crucially, her intelligence in a role that was a complete left turn. Josie and the Pussycats. The film, a satirical and sharp-witted deconstruction of pop music and consumerism, saw her play Valerie Brown, the level-headed, smart, and talented musician. The role was a chance to show her comedic timing, her musical side, and her ability to be genuinely charming. She proved she wasn't just the gritty indie drama queen that kids might have typecast her as. She could be fun, smart, and commercial. She was slowly, deliberately building her own house in Hollywood. The year 2002 was the pivot. It was the moment Rosario Dawson went from being a respected, recognizable indie actress to a genuine, bankable Hollywood player. The catalyst was Men in Black 2. This was not a small, character-driven drama. This was a massive, global summer blockbuster, a special effects extravaganza, and the sequel to one of the biggest hits of the previous decade. She was cast as Laura Vasquez, the romantic lead opposite Will Smith, who was, at that precise moment, the undisputed biggest movie star in the world. She held her own against the supernova-level charisma of Smith and the established legacy of the franchise. She was charming, funny, and commanded the mainstream audience's attention. This film put her face on billboards around the world, but here is the detail that truly defines her character, the move that is so purely, essentially, Dawson. In that very same year, 2002, she also starred in Spike Lee's powerful, elegiac post-9/11 drama, The 25th Hour. This was not a role she was simply offered as a chaser to her blockbuster debut. It was a role she fought for. She played Naturelle Riviera, the loyal but deeply conflicted girlfriend of Edward Norton's convicted drug dealer who was living out his last 24 hours of freedom. It was a complex, dramatic, and emotionally fraught role that required nuance, depth, and a profound understanding of loyalty and betrayal. As she has told the story, she essentially had to demand the part from Spike Lee, who was perhaps hesitant to see her in that light. She knew she could do it. She knew she understood this woman and this world. This 1-2 punch set the template for her entire career. She had the pragmatism to do the blockbuster, to secure her financial freedom and her public platform. But she had the artistic integrity to immediately leverage that platform to do a small, important, challenging film. She refused to be put in a box as the blockbuster girlfriend. She was going to be both in the same year. This tenacity, this refusal to choose between commercial success and artistic credibility is a direct echo of the squat mentality. You use every tool available. You build in all directions at once. This newfound A-list momentum continued. In 2003, she starred in The Rundown, a high-octane action comedy that solidified her as a dynamic screen presence. She sparked incredible, palpable chemistry with another rising superstar, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. She played Mariana, a tough-as-nails resistance leader, not a damsel in distress, but a capable and formidable partner in the action. She proved she could handle action just as well as she could handle comedy, drama, and blockbusters. Then, she took one of her biggest and riskiest swings yet. Oliver Stone's sprawling, ambitious, and ultimately divisive epic, Alexander, 2004. She was cast as Roxane, the fierce Bactrian princess who becomes the wife of Colin Farrell's Alexander the Great. This was a role fraught with challenges, a massive historical epic, a complex accent, a character who had to convey immense power and cunning in a world entirely run by men. Rosario's own description of Roxane is incredibly revealing of her process. She called her fierce and strong but limited in power, which forced her to become manipulative. It's a sharp, insightful analysis that shows how deeply she considers her character's psychology, their limitations, and their strategies for survival, a theme that resonates deeply with her own life story. This period, from 2002 to 2004, was her mainstream transformation. She had successfully made the leap from indie darling to Hollywood power player, but it was the year 2005 that would cement her as an icon, a year in which two radically different roles would define her for a generation. It began with Sin City. Robert Rodriguez and Frank Miller's groundbreaking film was a visual marvel, a stylistic earthquake that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It was a hyper-stylized, brutally violent black and white neo-noir with splashes of vivid color. In this savage operatic world, Dawson played Gale, the leather-clad, machine-gun-toting dominatrix warrior queen of Old Town's prostitutes. She was not a victim. She was not a damsel. She was a general. She commanded a legion of deadly little sisters and was the fierce, protective lover of Clive Owen's character. The role was pure, uncompromising pulp, and she attacked it with a ferocious, joyful energy that made her one of the film's most memorable and iconic figures. She would later gleefully return to this brutal and beautiful world in 2014 for the sequel, Sin City, A Dame to Kill 4. And then in that very same year, she took on the role that for many would define her. It was the film adaptation of the Pulitzer Prize-winning musical Rent. This was more than just a movie role for her. It was a profound full-circle moment. Rent is a story about a group of young artists, musicians, squatters, and friends living in the poverty of the Lower East Side, dealing with love, loss, creativity, and the devastating shadow of the AIDS epidemic. It was almost literally the story of her childhood. She was cast as Mimi Marquez, the heroin-addicted, HIV-positive exotic dancer who sings the show's most iconic anthems, Light My Candle and Out Tonight. It was a role originated on Broadway by the legendary Daphne Rubin Vega, and the pressure from the musical's massive, devoted fan base was immense. But Rosario was Mimi. She didn't need to research the role. She had lived it. She understood this character not as an abstract victim, but as a person, a neighbor, a friend. She understood the desperation, the vitality, the tragedy, and the defiant joy of living on the edge. She poured all the empathy and understanding of her upbringing into that role. Her performance was a raw, devastating, and beautiful triumph. When she sang, you heard the gravel of the streets she grew up on. When she cried, you felt the weight of the grief she had witnessed firsthand. It wasn't just acting, it felt like a testimony. For her work, she won the Satellite Award for Best Supporting Actress. She had taken the pain, resilience, and defiant spirit of her own past and transformed it into art for the entire world to see. From the stoop on East 13th Street to the center of a global cinematic event, she had brought her world with her, and in doing so, had become an icon. By the end of 2005, Rosario Dawson had achieved what most actors only dream of. In a single year, she had become a cinematic icon twice over, embodying both the ferocious pulp noir warrior of Sin City and the tragic, beating heart of Rent. She had translated her entire life story into an winning performance. She had arrived. The path forward seemed clear. Leverage this new A-list status, take the lead in major studio dramas, and become the next great leading lady. But the girl raised in a squat was never going to follow a pre-drawn blueprint. Having reached the industry's peak, she chose not to build upward, but to pivot, demonstrating that her choices would be dictated by her own fearless curiosity, not by Hollywood's expectations. How does one follow a year like 2005? How does an actor, having just delivered two of the most iconic and defining performances of the decade, even begin to write the next chapter? For Rosario Dawson, a year that saw her immortalized as both the avenging warrior queen Gale in Sin City and the heartbreaking tragic soul of Mimi Marquez in Rent, the danger was palpable. The industry, in its relentless quest for categorization, would have been all too happy to place her in a box. She could have become the tough-as-nails action woman or the vulnerable, dramatic heroine for the rest of her days. The scripts would have poured in, offering pale imitations of the lightning she had just captured in a bottle. But Rosario Dawson was not forged in the fires of convention. She is a builder, an architect, and a pragmatist, and she understood that the greatest threat to a career is not failure, but predictable success. The girl from the squat, who knew that survival depended on resourcefulness and the ability to adapt, applied that same lesson to the precarious world of Hollywood. Instead of doubling down, she executed one of the sharpest, most audacious left turns imaginable. She chose to defy expectations, not just once, but over and over, creating a mosaic of roles that proved her range, her fearlessness, and her utter refusal to be anything other than herself. In 2006, just months after the world had seen her raw, emotionally devastating, and award-winning performance in Rent, audiences were confronted with a radically different Rosario. She joined the cult universe of filmmaker Kevin Smith for Clerks II. This was not a prestige drama or a stylish action flick. This was a return to the lo-fi, black and white, and later color world of Dante Hicks and Randall Graves, characters who had defined an entire generation of 1990s slacker cynicism. The film was proudly, profoundly profane, a symphony of high-minded philosophical debate and lowbrow scatological humor, delivered entirely by characters working in a movie's fast food restaurant. To step into this world, 12 years after the original, was a risky move for an actress of her new stature. She was cast as Becky Scott, the manager of the movies, and the character was a revelation. She was not just a romantic foil, she was the film's beating heart and its catalyst for change. She was sharp, incredibly funny, and possessed a surprising warmth that cut through the protagonist's decades of self-imposed misery. She could not only keep up with the rapid-fire, pop culture-laced dialogue of the View Askew-niverse, but she could elevate it. Her chemistry with actors Brian O'Halloran, Dante, and Jeff Anderson, Randall, was immediate and believable, seamlessly integrating her into a dynamic that had been established over a decade prior. But the true measure of her fearlessness, the detail that has become the stuff of legend, was her reaction to the script's most outrageous set piece, the infamous and hysterically graphic donkey show scene. As she and Kevin Smith have both recounted, this scene, a moment so absurd and boundary-pushing that it would have sent most A-list actors running for the hills, was the very thing that made her decide to take the part. She read it, understood its subversive, intelligent, and utterly fearless brand of humor, and knew she had to be a part of it. It was a complete rejection of movie star preciousness. She demonstrated in no uncertain terms that she had no ego, that she was not afraid to get her hands dirty, and that she valued a challenging, brilliant joke over any concern for her image. Her performance was a triumph, earning her a new legion of fans from the cult comedy world and proving unequivocally that her range was far wider than anyone had previously imagined. Her loyalty to this creative family would be proven years later when she lovingly and heartbreakingly returned to the role for Clerks 3 in 2022. Having proven her comedic and subversive bona fides, she immediately pivoted again, this time into the arms of another of cinema's great auteurs, Quentin Tarantino. In 2007, she starred in Death Proof, Tarantino's half of the ambitious Grindhouse double feature project, which he co-created with his Sin City collaborator, Robert Rodriguez. The entire project was a loving, high-concept homage to the gritty, low-budget exploitation films of the 1970s. Death Proof was Tarantino's take on a slasher film, but with a muscle car instead of a machete. Dawson was cast as Abernathy Ross, part of the second group of women who find themselves targeted by the film's villain, the menacing stuntman Mike, Kurt Russell. As Abernathy, she was a tough, smart, and resourceful makeup artist, and she, along with her ship's mass sisters, played by Tracy Toms and stuntwoman Zoe Bell, was not a victim. She was a survivor. The role culminated in one of the most thrilling, satisfying, and practical effects-driven car chases in modern cinema. But more importantly, it ended with one of the most brutal and cathartic beatdowns ever filmed. Abernathy is not a damsel who gets rescued. She is an avenger. After the chase ends, she is the one who joins her friends in pulling the battered stuntman Mike from the wreckage, delivering a final, defiant, and gleeful stomp. It was a performance that cemented her image as a formidable, intelligent, and utterly cool presence. A woman who could be both glamorous and terrifying, often in the same breath. After 2 consecutive films that were subversive, violent, and foul-mouthed, what was her next logical move? Naturally, it was to pivot back to high-prestige, mainstream emotional drama. In 2008, she reunited with her Men in Black 2 co-star Will Smith for the film 7 Pounds. This was a profoundly different vehicle. It was a somber, heartfelt, and structurally complex story about a man attempting to atone for a past tragedy. Dawson played Emily Posa, a woman suffering from a debilitating heart condition with a rare blood type, who is living on borrowed time. This role was a showcase for her dramatic depth, a performance built not on witty comebacks or physical prowess, but on quiet, gut-wrenching vulnerability. She had to convey the physical exhaustion, the fear, and the flickering, defiant hope of a person facing her own mortality. Her performance was the film's anchor. Her chemistry with Smith, this time layered with a desperate, tender romanticism, gave the film its emotional weight and its justification for the protagonist's extreme, secretive plan. It was a world away from the warriors, managers, and dancers she had recently played. It was a quiet, moving, and deeply humane performance that demonstrated once again the sheer breadth of her talent. In the span of 3 years, she had successfully navigated vulgar comedy, exploitation action, and tear-jerking drama, refusing to be defined by any of them. But even as her film career was exploding in all these different directions, the do-it-yourself squat mentality was always at work beneath the surface. Rosario Dawson was never going to be an actress who just sat by the phone and waited for her agents to call. She was a builder. If the roles she wanted didn't exist, she would create them. If the platforms she wanted to use weren't available, she would build them herself. In 2006, the same year Clerks 2 was released, she co-created and co-wrote her own comic book series, Occult Crimes Task Force. This was not a case of an actor simply lending their likeness to a vanity project. She was intimately involved in its creation, developing a story set in her own backyard of Manhattan about a special police unit that handles crimes of a supernatural and magical nature. The main character, Sophia Ortiz, was based on her. This project was a direct line to her interests, her love of genre storytelling, mythology, and the unseen world, and it was an entrepreneurial, forward-thinking move to create and own her own intellectual property. A year later, in 2007, she took on the dual role of star and producer for the film Descent. This was not a safe or commercial choice. It was a dark, harrowing, and deeply unsettling rape revenge thriller, a film that confronted trauma head-on. Her role as Maya, a college student who is brutally assaulted and subsequently spirals into a dark world of drugs and vengeance, was incredibly demanding and emotionally raw. To choose to not only star in such a difficult film, but to also take on the responsibility of producing it, of shepherding its creation, speaks volumes about her character. It showed an intense commitment to telling difficult, uncompromising stories, and a desire to maintain creative control over her own work, no matter how dark the subject matter. This drive to create her own content and explore new media reached a new peak in 2008. Long before streaming became the dominant force in entertainment, she starred in and served as an executive producer for the online sci-fi series Gemini Division. The series, which consisted of dozens of short micro-episodes, was designed for the digital age, a prescient move that showed her understanding that the future of content was not limited to theater screens or television sets. She was experimenting with new forms of distribution, new narrative structures, and once again, she was not just an actor for hire. She was a producer, a partner, a builder. Her creative impulses could not be contained by cameras, digital or otherwise. She was, at her core, a New York artist, and she returned to her roots on the stage. In the summer of 2005, the exact same year that Sin City and Rent were released, she made her official stage debut. At the peak of her cinematic breakout, when most actors would be focused exclusively on their next big-screen payday, she chose to star in a public theater production of the musical Two Gentlemen of Verona in New York Central Park. It was a move driven not by strategy, but by love. Love for the craft, love for the city, and love for the thrill of a live audience. She also lent her voice and presence to performances of The Vagina Monologues, a project that perfectly married her artistic life with her burgeoning activism, giving voice to Eve Ensler's powerful, essential work aimed at ending violence against women. Her musical inclinations, showcased so beautifully in Rent, were not limited to the stage. She was a collaborator, a creative muse in the music world, appearing in the Chemical Brothers' iconic 1999 music video for Out of Control. She contributed vocals to a 1998 remix of Prince's 1999, and most notably was featured on the track She Lives in My Lap, from Outkast's 2003 Grammy-winning masterpiece, Speakerbox / The Love Below. These were not random dalliances. They were collaborations with some of the most innovative and respected artists of her time: Prince, Outkast, Tarantino, Kevin Smith, Spike Lee. She was building a career not just of hits, but of cultural touchstones. This period from 2006 to 2008 was not just a hot streak. It was a masterclass in career architecture. She refused to be one thing. She was a comedian and a dramatic actress. She was an action hero and a vulnerable patient. She was a movie star and an indie producer. She was a comic book writer and a stage performer. She had taken the foundation of her 2005 breakthrough, and instead of building a simple tall tower, She had built a sprawling complex and fascinating estate with new wings and hidden rooms being added all the time. She was not just climbing the ladder, she was redesigning the entire building. This refusal to be contained was not just a passing phase, it became her career's operating manual. By co-creating her own comic books, producing her own dark-themed films, and experimenting with digital series long before it was fashionable, she had proven that she was not just an actress for hire. She was a creative force, a producer, and a builder who was comfortable in any medium. This multifaceted entrepreneurial spirit, this ability to see the connections between different worlds and to build across them, made her uniquely and perfectly positioned for the next great sea change in the entertainment industry, an era that would demand, above all, a mastery of entire universes. As the 2000s began, the entire machinery of Hollywood was undergoing a seismic transformation. The era of the standalone movie star, who could open a film based on name recognition alone, was beginning to wane. A new model pioneered by Marvel Studios had taken over, the shared universe. This was the age of long-form, interconnected storytelling, where films and, increasingly, television shows were just chapters in a sprawling, multi-decade epic. Simultaneously, the rise of streaming services like Netflix fundamentally altered how audiences consume content, creating a demand for binge-worthy, high-quality television that rivaled and often surpassed cinema in its scope and ambition. This new landscape created a new kind of stardom. It required actors who possessed not just charisma but stamina, not just talent, but the ability to embody a character over many years, across multiple different titles, and under the stewardship of various directors and writers. It required a unique blend of consistency and adaptability. Once again, as the very ground of the industry shifted beneath her feet, Rosario Dawson didn't just find a foothold. She became an essential, load-bearing pillar. She didn't just join one franchise. She became the connective tissue for three of the largest and most passionate fan communities on Earth. Her first major foray into this new world was with Marvel, but in a move that was characteristically subversive. She wasn't on the big screen with the gods and super spies of the Avengers. Her domain was the streets. In 2015, she debuted as Claire Temple in the first season of Netflix's Daredevil. The series was a revelation, a dark, gritty, and brutally realistic take on the Marvel Universe, far removed from the polished sheen of the films. In this world of broken bones, moral ambiguity, and hallway brawls, Claire Temple was not a superhero. She was something far more important. She was the human anchor. She was a night shift nurse, a healer, the one who stitched up the heroes when their bodies were as broken as their spirits. She was the one who kept their secrets, who patched their wounds, and who, with a weary but unwavering pragmatism, reminded them of the human cost of their crusade. The role was a stroke of casting genius. Who better to play the ultimate community builder, the person who relentlessly fixes what is broken, than the woman who grew up in a squat, literally patching walls and connecting wires? She brought an immediate, grounded reality to a world of vigilantes in masks. She wasn't awestruck by them. She was concerned for them, and often frustrated by them. Claire Temple quickly became more than just a supporting character in one show. She became the Nick Fury of the Defenders, the single unifying thread that ran through almost the entire Netflix Marvel saga. She was the only character to appear in Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, where her role was significantly expanded, becoming the romantic and moral center for the titular hero, Iron Fist, and the climactic team-up miniseries, The Defenders. She was the conscience, the pragmatist, the friend. She was the one who introduced these disparate, dysfunctional heroes to each other, forcing them to see their shared purpose. In an ecosystem of superpowered individuals, she was the one who possessed the true power, the power of community, of care, and of unwavering everyday courage. She was, in essence, playing a superhero whose only powers were her medical skills and her profound, hard-won empathy, the very skills her childhood had taught her to value above all else. While she was anchoring Marvel's entire street-level universe in live action, she was simultaneously and remarkably conquering the animated universe of their chief competitor, DC Comics. For years, she has been the definitive, unwavering voice of the single, most iconic female superhero of all time, Wonder Woman. She first voiced Diana Prince in the 2015 animated film Justice League, Throne of Atlantis. This was not a one-off performance. It was the beginning of a long and celebrated tenure that would see her voice the character across the entire DC animated movie universe, DCAMU, a series of 16 interconnected films released over 6 years. Her vocal performance became the standard for the character. She captured the perfect, difficult blend of Diana's core attributes: the royal authority of a princess of Themyscira, the fierce, uncompromising strength of an Amazonian warrior, and the deep, compassionate heart of a hero who truly believes in humanity. Her voice carried the weight of a god and the warmth of a friend. She portrayed Diana's leadership in Justice League versus Teen Titans, her internal conflicts in Wonder Woman Bloodlines, and her final desperate, world-ending battle in 2020's Justice League Dark, Apocalypse War. By the end of this epic saga, her voice was, for an entire generation of fans, synonymous with the character of Wonder Woman. And she didn't stop there. Her vocal chameleon skills were so valued by DC that she was brought in to voice other major characters. She gave a sharp, witty, and perfectly timed performance as Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, in the critically acclaimed blockbuster hit The Lego Batman movie in 2017. She even took on the complex, sultry, and dangerous role of Catwoman for The Batman, the Audio Adventures podcast. She has, in essence, become a cornerstone of the entire DC multiverse, a trusted and versatile talent who can embody its greatest heroes and anti-heroes with equal skill. But in 2020, she stepped into a role that was perhaps the most daunting of her career. It was a role that carried the hopes, fears, and dreams of one of the most passionate and dedicated fan bases on the planet. She was cast as the live-action Ahsoka Tano in the Star Wars universe. This was not just any role. Ahsoka Tano, the former Jedi Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, is arguably one of the most beloved and complex characters in the entire Star Wars saga. Fans had watched her grow up over 7 seasons of the Clone Wars animated series, evolving from a snippy, often panned sidekick into a wise, powerful, independent, and profoundly tragic warrior. She was the survivor of the Jedi Purge, a Ronin-like figure who walked her own path, haunted by the fall of her master to the dark side. For years, fans had dreamed of seeing her in live action, and for just as long, Rosario Dawson's name was at the very top of every fan casting list, a choice so popular and so perfect that it became a running campaign online. She made her debut in Chapter 13, The Jedi, an episode of the global phenomenon The Mandalorian. The collective sigh of relief, followed by a roar of approval from the fandom, was audible. She was perfect. This was not a case of an actor simply wearing the makeup and the headtails leku. This was an act of profound stewardship. She embodied Ahsoka. She captured the quiet, Zen-like wisdom, the precise samurai-inspired grace of her combat, and most importantly, the deep, abiding sadness in her eyes. She was a warrior who had seen too much, who had lost everything, but who still chose to fight. It was a performance of immense respect for the character's animated legacy, created by voice actress Ashley Eckstein, and a flawless translation of that character into a new medium. She had brought to life a figure that millions already had a deep personal relationship with, and she had done it flawlessly. Her role was not a mere cameo. She had been brought in as a central figure in the future of the Star Wars galaxy. She reprised the role in the Book of Boba Fett, appearing alongside Luke Skywalker himself in a moment that sent fans into overdrive. And then, in 2023, she took her rightful place at the center of the story in her own critically acclaimed series, Ahsoka. She has become a true master in the Star Wars saga, carrying the legacy of the Skywalker story on her shoulders and guiding a new generation. The sheer fact of this achievement is staggering. To be a major, beloved, recurring character in the Marvel, DC, and Star Wars universes simultaneously is a feat unmatched by almost any other actor. But even while juggling these three massive, time-consuming franchises, she never abandoned her roots. She continued to do challenging, vital, and politically charged work in television. She was the main cast member in the quirky, stylish 2020 crime drama Briar Patch. In 2021, she gave a powerful and steely performance as the determined DEA agent Bridget Meyer in the Emmy-winning Hulu miniseries Dopesick, which unflinchingly tackled the horrors of the opioid crisis and the corporate greed that fueled it. And in 2022, she starred as the fierce medic Alma Ortega in the dystopian miniseries DMZ, set in a demilitarized zone in a near-future American Civil War, a story that brought her right back to the themes of survival and community in a broken New York. Her work ethic remained, as it had always been, relentless. Her choices were, as always, interesting. She is the rare actor who can comfortably and believably exist in a gritty, grounded drama about addiction one month, and a galaxy-spanning space opera about Jedi and Twi'leks the next. She hadn't just joined the new age of franchise entertainment. She had become its essential unifying force. The one actor who could seemingly walk between worlds at will. Her conquest of the franchise landscape was staggering. To become a central, beloved figure in the three largest story worlds of the modern era, Marvel, DC, and Star Wars, is a feat of cultural ubiquity unmatched by almost any other actor. She had become the face of modern mythology, a unifying force for millions of fans. But for Dawson, this massive platform, this global recognition, was never the end goal. It was the means. It was the scaffolding she had built to give her leverage for her true primary work, the hands-on, unglamorous, and absolutely essential job of rebuilding the real world. For many public figures, activism is an accessory. It is a side project, a carefully curated appendage to their personal brand, managed by publicists and deployed at opportune moments. It manifests as a heartfelt tweet, an appearance at a high-profile charity gala, or the lending of one's name to a glossy pamphlet. It is, more often than not, a role to be played. For Rosario Dawson, this was never an option. For her, activism is not a role. It is her primary language. It is not an accessory. It is the load-bearing wall of her entire existence. It is the direct, logical, and inevitable continuation of the story that began in a derelict tenement building on East 13th Street. The girl who watched her parents literally pull wires and lay pipes to bring life to a dead space grew into a woman who believes it is her non-negotiable duty to help rebuild the broken systems of a broken world. She simply scaled up the operation. Her life's work is a case study in how to translate personal experience into public good, not through abstract charity, but through structural, hands-on, strategic intervention. She is not just a donor. She's a founder, a board member, a strategist, and a protester, willing to put her own body and freedom on the line. She is, in every sense of the word, a builder. Her most significant and defining contribution is Voto Latino, an organization that is a perfect microcosm of her entire philosophy. She co-founded this nonprofit organization in 2004, a moment when her own career was ascending with films like Alexander. She could have been singularly focused on her new A-list status. Instead, she looked back at her community, at the vibrant, massive, and powerful Latinx population in the United States, and she saw a paradox that she knew intimately, a community with immense potential power that was, for complex reasons, disengaged and underrepresented in the political process. The system was not working for them, so they were not working within the system. This was the squat mentality applied to civics. When the grid doesn't serve you, you don't curse the darkness. You build your own generator. Voto Latino was conceived as that generator. Its mission was and is to encourage and empower young Hispanic and Latinx people to register to vote and to participate in the political process. This was not a simple feel-good, get-out-the-vote campaign. It was, from its inception, a targeted, tactical, and culturally savvy intervention. Dawson and her co-founders understood that this demographic, young, tech-native, and often bilingual, was not being reached by traditional, analog political outreach. Voto Latino harnessed the power of technology, celebrity, and media to meet young voters where they were, on their phones, at concerts, and online. It was one of the first organizations to pioneer digital-first voter registration, using text messaging, social media, and viral content to demystify the process and make it accessible. This was not just about changing minds, it was about removing barriers. It was the civic equivalent of laying the pipes, of making the water run so that people could finally drink. The organization didn't just tell people why they should vote, it gave them the tools to do it. The success of Voto Latino has been nothing short of staggering. It has grown from a fledgling idea into one of the most effective and influential voter registration organizations in the country. It has registered, by its own account, well over 1 million new voters, fundamentally altering the political landscape in key states and giving a new, powerful voice to a generation that had previously been silenced. This is not activism as a gesture. This is activism as structural engineering, a direct application of the pragmatic problem-solving ethos she learned as a child. But for Dawson, building a new system is only half the battle. The other half is confronting the old one. Her political convictions are not for show, and she is not an armchair activist. She is willing to put her own comfort, reputation, and freedom on the line for her beliefs. Her support for progressive causes has been unwavering, most famously as one of the most prominent and passionate surrogates for Senator Bernie Sanders during his 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns. She didn't just endorse him, she crisscrossed the country, appearing at rallies, giving impassioned speeches, and arguing for a political revolution with a fervor that was born from her own lived experience of systemic inequality. Crucially, she has proven repeatedly that she is willing to move from the podium to the police wagon. Her history of civil disobedience is long and consistent. In 2004, at the height of the Iraq War, she was arrested along with other celebrities while protesting against President George W. Bush. This was not a consequence-free act. She was a rising star, And such public partisan acts were and are often seen as career limiting. She did not care. She had been raised to believe that when something is fundamentally wrong, you have a moral obligation to stand up and say so loudly. This commitment was demonstrated even more profoundly in April 2016. Dawson was arrested again, this time on the steps of the U.S. Capitol as part of the Democracy Spring protests. The focus of this movement was the corrupting influence of money in politics, a complex structural issue that Dawson correctly identified as the root of so much political dysfunction. She was not there as a celebrity, she was there as a citizen, deliberately, calmly, and purposefully crossing a police line and submitting to arrest to draw attention to the issue. This act reveals the core of her character. She retains that complete lack of preciousness forged in the squat. She is not intimidated by systems of authority, and she is not afraid of personal inconvenience in the service of a greater good. She doesn't just talk about the plumbing of a broken world. She is willing to get her hands dirty, to get down in the muck, and to try and fix the pipes herself. While her political work is national, her community work remains deeply local. The full-circle nature of her life is perhaps best illustrated by her longtime active membership on the board of the Lower East Side Girls Club. This is not some distant, abstract charity. This is the very community center in the very neighborhood that helped raise her. It is a place that provides a safe haven, education, and empowerment for young women growing up in the same, albeit gentrified, streets that she did. Her involvement is not a photo op. It is an act of governance. As a board member, she is now one of the architects of the very support system that enabled her to thrive. She is quite literally reinforcing the foundation for the next generation of Rosario Dawsons. Her advocacy is as broad and deeply intersectional as her own heritage. She understands that no issue exists in a vacuum. She is a prominent board member for V-Day, the global movement founded by Eve Ensler to end violence against women and girls. She has performed in the Vagina Monologues, lending her powerful voice to a cause that is deeply intertwined with her on-screen portrayals of strong, defiant, and avenging women. Her support extends to a vast network of organizations: Oxfam, fighting global poverty; Amnesty International, defending human rights; PFLAG, supporting the LGBTQ plus community and their families; Conservation International, and the Nature Conservancy, fighting for environmental protection; Doctors Without Borders, providing medical aid in crisis zones and Save the Children. She sees the connections, understanding that environmental justice, economic justice, racial justice, and gender equality are all part of the same interconnected build. Perhaps the most evolved expression of her life's philosophy is Studio 189. Co-founded with her friend Abrima Erwia, this is not just another celebrity fashion brand. It is a social enterprise, an engine for economic self-sufficiency, and the global scale application of the squat mentality. The brand is focused on sustainable artisanal production, creating stunning apparel using traditional techniques in Ghana, West Africa. But the clothes are almost secondary to the mission. The goal of Studio 189 is to create jobs, empower communities, and build a self-sustaining economic model that is not reliant on foreign aid. It provides skills training, fair wages, and a global platform for its artisans, primarily women. In this, the legacy of her parents comes full circle. Just as Greg and Isabel used their trade skills, plumbing, electrical work, construction, to build a home and a community on East 13th Street, Rosario is now co-founder of an enterprise that uses trade skills, sewing, dyeing, weaving, to build a self-sufficient community on another continent. It is the ultimate expression of her core belief. You don't just give people a home. You give them the tools, the skills, and the opportunity to build one for themselves. As an architect of change, her public-facing work had become a powerful extension of her origins, applying the fix-it mentality of the squat to the nation's civic and social structures. But this philosophy was not just for her public life. It was and is the guiding principle for her private one. The true measure of a person's beliefs is not what they do in front of a camera or a crowd, but how they build their own home, their own family, and their own sense of self. To understand her complete legacy, one must look beyond the actress and the activist to the woman herself, and to the complex human and deeply personal ways she has chosen to build a life. In the modern age of ubiquitous celebrity, a public-facing life is often a carefully constructed performance, a flattened-out, brand-safe version of a human being. We are presented with either the flawless icon or the hot mess, simple archetypes designed for easy consumption. Rosario Dawson, in her typical defiant fashion, has refused to be either. Her personal life, which she has managed to both guard with a fierce protectiveness and discuss with a remarkable unfiltered openness, reflects the same depth, complexity, and contradictions that define her career and her activism. It is the life of a woman who is not playing a role, but is actively and at times messily building her own reality brick by brick. The most profound and character-defining act of her personal life arrived in 2014 when she made a decision that was a direct, tangible echo of her own origin story. She adopted a daughter, but this was not the celebrity adopts an infant story that often graces magazine covers. Rosario, at the age of 35, chose to adopt a 12-year-old girl, Isabella, from the foster care system. This distinction is everything. To adopt an older child is to make a conscious choice to parent a person who already has a history, a person who, like her, has known what it is to be on the outside of a traditional system, a person who needed not just a parent, but a home. This single act is a perfect lens through which to understand her entire philosophy. It was the squat mentality, the fix-it mentality, applied in the most personal, high-stakes way imaginable. She saw a need, a person who had been left behind by the system, and she did not wait for someone else to act. She stepped in and built a family, not from scratch, but from the materials that were already there, in need of assembly. It was a profound testament to her belief that a home is not something you are given, but something you make. Her public statements about it are not saccharine. They are practical, grounded, and rooted in the hard work of building trust and love, one day at a time. It is, she has implied, the hardest and most important role she has ever taken on. Her romantic life has, by virtue of her fame, also played out in the public eye, and it too reflects her complex, multifaceted world. She has had notable relationships with figures from across the creative and political spectrum, from film director Danny Boyle to the anarchic comedian Eric Andre. But her most high-profile relationship, the one that seemed to perfectly fuse the two halves of her life, was with U.S. Senator Cory Booker. They began dating around late 2018, and for several years they were a genuine political power couple. It was a fascinating dynamic, the street-level activist and the institutionalist politician, the Star Wars hero and the U.S. Senator. The relationship, which ended in early 2022, was a period where her personal life and her political advocacy were one and the same, a living, breathing embodiment of her commitment to civic engagement. Even her exploration of her own identity has been conducted with a characteristic honesty and refusal to be pinned down. In 2020, during an interview, she made a statement about her relationship with the LGBTQ plus community that was widely interpreted by the media as her coming out. The headlines were definitive, but Rosario, in a subsequent clarification, offered something far more nuanced and, in many ways, more interesting. She explained that while she had never been in a romantic relationship in that space, it doesn't mean it's never going to happen. She was, she stated, a proud and dedicated ally, but she resisted the simple binary label the media was so quick to assign. It was a typically honest and unfiltered moment. It was the response of a woman who, like her mixed heritage, has spent her entire life existing in the and rather than the or. She is comfortable with ambiguity, a trait that is essential to her art and her activism. And, as a wonderful humanizing detail, a grace note in a life of such intensity, she is a proud, self-proclaimed Trekkie. She is a deep and abiding fan of Star Trek. This fact is not just trivia, it is perfectly, cosmically fitting. Star Trek, at its core, is a franchise built on a radical utopian vision of a future built on cooperation, exploration, empathy, and the core belief that a diverse, unified collective is stronger than any individual. It is the ultimate builder's franchise. It is the perfect fictional universe for a woman who has dedicated her entire real life to trying to will that very future into existence. No life, especially one lived so publicly and so passionately at the intersection of Hollywood and Washington, is without its complexities and its challenges. In 2019, Rosario Dawson and her family found themselves at the center of a difficult and painful legal battle that seemed to strike at the very heart of her public persona. They were sued by Diedrich Finley, a transgender man who had been a longtime friend of the Dawson family and had for a time worked for them as a handyman. The lawsuit, when it was filed, contained a number of serious and shocking allegations. Finley accused the family of discrimination, assault, and battery, with many of the claims specifically related to his gender identity. The headlines were immediate and brutal, painting a picture that was deeply at odds with Dawson's entire public-facing life. How could a woman who was a board member for PFLAG, a vocal supporter of LGBTQ+ rights, and a progressive icon, be at the center of such a suit? The case was complex, personal, and deeply fraught. A tangled dispute between people who had once been close. As the legal process unfolded, however, the narrative began to shift, and the gap between the initial headlines and the legal facts widened. In August of 2020, a major development occurred. The plaintiff, Finley, voluntarily chose to withdraw 18 of the 20 original claims. This was a critical moment as the withdrawn claims included, crucially, all of the claims that had been filed against Rosario Dawson personally. The case proceeded, but she was no longer a defendant. The remaining 2 counts, which were against her mother, continued. Finally, in May of 2021, the entire case was dismissed by a Los Angeles Superior Court judge. The legal battle, which had cast a shadow over the family for 2 years, was over. The episode remains a complicated chapter, a stark and painful reminder that personal relationships, family dynamics, and private disputes are almost always far more complex than a public persona can ever suggest. It is a testament to the fact that headlines rarely, if ever, tell the full story, and that the same public figure who can unify global franchises can also be caught in the deeply human, messy, and painful tangles of private life. So, what is the lasting significance of Rosario Dawson? When the final accounting of her cultural contribution is made, where will she fit in the story? It is tempting and easy to define her by her biggest roles. She is Gale, the leather-clad warrior of Sin City. She is Mimi, the raw, beating heart of Rent. She is Claire Temple, the weary conscience of Marvel's streets. She is Ahsoka Tano, the hope of the Jedi, and the master to a new generation. She is, without question, a unifier of modern mythologies. But her true legacy is not any one of these roles, or even all of them combined. Her legacy is the invisible, unbreakable thread that connects them all. Her significance lies in her relentless, defiant authenticity. She is the architect of a career that, by all traditional Hollywood logic, should not exist. She is a woman of color, of a beautifully complex mixed heritage, who entered the industry in the 90s and flatly refused to be typecast. She is an indie darling, discovered on a stoop for a controversial art film, who became a blockbuster queen without ever losing her edge or her credibility. She is the rare actor who could star in Men in Black 2 and demand a role in Spike Lee's The 25th Hour in the exact same year, a move of such brilliant pragmatic integrity that it should be taught in acting schools. She is a global franchise star who will just as eagerly and with the same level of commitment produce a harrowing documentary, co-write a comic book, or get arrested on the steps of the Capitol. Her cultural impact is, therefore, twofold. As an actress, she has brought a grounded, fierce, and intelligent humanity to every character she has ever played, from the most fantastical space samurai to the most grimly realistic DEA agent. She doesn't just play strong women, she plays smart women, tired women, resourceful women. But her political and social impact may be even greater, and it will certainly be more lasting. With Voto Latino, she didn't just lend her name. She co-founded and built an engine for change from the ground up. She saw a broken piece of the civic system, a community unserved, and she applied the squat mentality. She has helped to fundamentally alter the American political landscape by empowering a new, massive generation of voters. This is not a side project. It is a parallel legacy, every bit as significant as her filmography. The lesson we can learn from her story is the very first one she ever learned, at age 6, in a cold apartment with no power. You are not defined by your circumstances. You are defined by what you build. She's a living, breathing testament to the power of self-sufficiency, the necessity of community, and the profound world-changing force of radical empathy. She remains relevant and vital, not just because she is in Star Wars, but because she still operates with the heart of a Lower East Side survivor. She sees a problem, a broken system, an unheard community, a crumbling wall. And her first instinct, her only instinct, is to pick up the tools and get to work. In the end, the story of Rosario Dawson is not a rags to riches fairy tale. That narrative is too simple, too clean. It's something far more real and far more powerful. It's a ruins to reality epic. She is a woman who was born on the margins, and instead of just trying to fight her way to the center, she has spent her life redefining the map, proving that the margins are, in fact, the most fertile ground for creation. She took the raw materials of a difficult childhood, the poverty, the diversity, the struggle, the communal solidarity, and used them as her foundation. Upon that foundation, she has built a career of breathtaking range, a platform for profound structural activism, and a life of deep personal meaning. The shy, watchful girl on the stoop became a warrior in Sin City. The child who grew up in the Rent generation gave that generation's definitive heartbreaking performance. The woman who watched her parents wire their own home helped to build and power a new nationwide political movement. Her life is a blueprint for resilience. It teaches us that you don't need permission to build. You don't need to wait for the system to save you. You just need the will, the community, and the courage to start laying the pipes and pulling the wires yourself. Rosario Dawson didn't just find a home in this world, she built one. And in the process, she's made it a little more habitable for everyone else.